Hey everyone, welcome. Pleasure to have you guys all joining us for the Revenue Management Roundtable. We got a great panel for you today. We'll give it a couple minutes for people to kind of come in, but while you're joining, if you want to hop into the chat and let us know where you're coming from, if you care to, a little bit about your portfolio, we'd love to see who's listening today. Um, should be a pretty good situation. Any of you guys got fun plans for Memorial Day? It's like this weekend, isn't it?
Yeah, early this year.
I'm heading to Scottsdale, see some friends.
Nice. Go where it's warm.
Yes, leaving a warm state for another warm state.
Hey, Henry.
Staying far
See you
away
in the
from the
chat.
beach.
Staying far away from the beach?
This weekend, yes.
And
Too
the
many people.
crowds.
How warm is the water in the Gulf right now?
It's still cold to me, but I'm not a good authority on that because I'm always cold.
Cold.
I can
I'm in
get
the,
about to my ankles right now. That's how I can test it.
well, I'm in the Pacific Northwest, and last time we were at Darm in December, we were swimming because I've never been in 70-degree water. The Puget Sound never gets above like 50s, 50.
Don't even call me until it's 85 in the water.
85?
Yeah.
The air won't even be
Like
85 for
a
another
hot
month,
tub.
too.
The air is 85 right now here.
Hey everyone, pleasure to have you guys here. We'll give it like one more minute and then we will start with introductions and then we'll dive right in. Just so you know, this call is recorded, so if you're working on some kind of reporting while you're listening and you hear something that you want to go back to, you will be able to listen to this. And also, if you have other team members or friends who aren't able to attend, we'll be able to, you'll be able to get access to the recording and we'll have this up on the Wheelhouse YouTube so you can share it out or get access to it. Um, I guess we can just get started. Welcome, everyone. Really glad to see everyone in the chat here. My name is John DeRelay. I'm the head of Revenue Management Education here at Wheelhouse. And welcome to our Revenue Management Roundtable. If you haven't been to one of these before, it's something we do roughly every 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and we bring professional revenue managers onto the call to just have a conversation about what's going on kind of like right now. What's happened in the last season, what's happening now, what's happening in the future. And it's a place for you guys to kind of listen to what professional revenue managers are seeing and thinking about in their portfolios, what kind of strategies they're implementing, and ideally get down into some of the nitty gritty so that maybe you can take some of those ideas and see where they might apply in your own portfolios and markets. We'll go around and do some introductions here. If you guys could give us your name, who you're with, a little bit about your portfolio, and anything else you want, that'd be great. And why don't we start with Jordan?
Oh my God, I lost my mouse on my screen. So take what I say with a grain of salt there. Everybody, I'm Jordan Locke. I've been a revenue manager for almost 10 years now. I'm currently with Prometheus. We're building an AI agentic revenue system for revenue managers in the short-term rental space. So I'll try not to talk too much about AI and bore everybody. Everybody gets enough. But that's where I'm heads down at right now.
Awesome. Thanks, Jordan. Rachel?
Rachel Robinson, VP of Revenue and Marketing with VTrips. We operate in 10 states, about 20 plus markets, beach, mountains, everywhere in between. Been in the industry in revenue management specifically right around 10 years as well.
Lauren?
Hey everyone, Lauren Hardison. I have also been in the industry for 10 years, going on 11. So looks like we've all been on this ride together for a while. I'm currently Director of Revenue Management at Awayday, and my focuses are on the Oregon and South Florida portfolios. I give that quotes because it's basically everything not in the panhandle. So um, like Tampa, Fort Myers, New Smyrna Beach, just kind of the Florida catch-all.
Awesome. That's a big distance between your markets.
Sure is. We like to keep things interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And Heather?
Hi, my name is Heather, and my company is Richer Logic. We provide revenue management, data analytics services, and support primarily in vacation rental, short-term rental. We've been around for the last 6 years, but we also work in the hybrid hotel, short-term rental space as well with like mixed portfolios or boutique hotel properties. And I've been in revenue management distribution my whole career, working across restaurants, hotels, resorts. My partner, other folks on our team have done casino revenue management, but it's been a fun ride to be in revenue management distribution for this industry because it's changed and evolved so much, and it's going to keep doing that faster, and just exciting because I think all of us here and folks on this call are kind of defining what it is for this space. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me, John.
Yeah, pleasure. Okay, so we'll get right into it. Just so you guys know, please feel free to send some messages in the chat. Love to see your comments. I will try to read them. I won't promise that I'll answer your questions. We don't usually do that here, but sometimes we do pull stuff up. So please feel free to ask or comment in the chat. The first thing we're going to start out with is just kind of what's been happening, right? We're in a great time period to be doing this call, right? Kind of at the end of May, right before going into a lot of summer high seasons, just coming out of that kind of like spring break period, seeing how that performed, maybe the first taste for the year. So it's a great time for us to talk about what strategies are happening because we're kind of like, in my opinion, in really one of the most critical times for most people around the country. Um, Curious what you guys have been seeing in your portfolio. How do you think spring went? And what are you kind of drawing forward into summer? What are you kind of extrapolating forward from? And anyone want to volunteer to go first? All right, I'll call on people then. Rachel, you came off of mute.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it. Um, Most of our markets had a really strong spring. I felt like we had a good recovery from that really horrendous March that most of the industry had last year. We had more of a normal March. Spring break was condensed back to, 2 to 3 weeks instead of spread out across six. Having, Easter be in that normal time was helpful. I mean, we didn't have anywhere that just really blew it out of the water, but a lot more stability. I think the markets that are kind of benefited the most from that seasonality were the South Florida and Central West Florida areas that have their peak season coming in February, March, April, before gas prices did what they did. So I think they kind of were able to skirt a little bit of the panic that I've felt happening the past couple of weeks, and that didn't seem to affect our spring too much. It got in right beforehand.
Yeah, that makes sense. I talked to a lot of revenue managers who I don't know. I'm going to put this out there and I want to see if what you guys think. I had felt like the booking season started slow at the beginning of the year. When I was talking to revenue managers, I felt like there was a lot more concern in like December, January for the upcoming year, and particularly in those areas with really robust revenue management practices like across the Gulf, they started being pretty conservative. And it seems like that booking window came pretty late this year. Like it ended up being quite strong. It ended up coming in. What I have noticed in some of the market data, though, is that that's not the case in every market the further north you get. And I think in some of the areas where people were a little less conservative, it didn't move. I think the Gulf really benefited the most. But I'm curious, what did you think about the booking window for spring this year? And what did you do? Like how did your teams behave in response to the booking window this year for spring?
I, I'll, oh, go ahead, Jordan.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think it's right. Like everybody was really worried going into it. I think everybody was looking for like ways to mitigate their risk. Um, but it did end up coming in late, which gave people kind of that reassurance that the system still works. What we did is we really looked at risk mitigation, so really getting some early bookings in to get some things on the books. We really had people kind of lean into their unique value propositions and try to target a more specific demographic. Not sure to try to win the whole market, but really specifically what would fit their property. And then I think the business was a little more steady for the markets that we have up north. And so while it came in late, there was still some positive signs early, maybe not January, February, but in season. So it actually turned out pretty decent.
I would just add maybe to some of the things both Rachel and Jordan said. Spring recap, I would say ski was just like, especially West Coast ski was like crazy. So kind of like setting that aside, I think that leads to concern for next year for them. East Coast ski was different and better. Easter moving for sure impacted a lot of markets in a good way for March, in a tough way to create the same year over year April results. May's been a little bit of a, I would say, even a more aggressive shoulder. I think it's been a little tougher. Maybe that's the macroeconomic gas prices. Memorial being earlier is interesting, but overarching all of that, almost every market we look at, and we work across like US and outside US, beach, whatever, urban. If you look at average booking window for like the last year versus average booking window in recent months, it's shorter. So it's like, I think that is like something that is making the job tougher. I think my theory is people are booking vacation rentals like they book hotels. It's instant book. They know there's options. They're just like waiting. They don't see the need to like book the perfect house so far out because they're just becoming more confident with this industry and that there's going to be an option. So that I'll stop there, but I think that's an overarching trend that probably will continue to. I know we haven't gotten to like future yet, but I'll stop there.
No, I just wanted to piggyback on that, Heather. It's something that we're seeing as well is that continuous strong in-month bookings, like the last minute filling in. But what I've been noticing is kind of the 30 to 60 window, which usually is pretty steady, has been kind of a drop. So we're seeing, 90 plus booking, okay, for those larger homes, for the high quality, and then the in-month, but kind of that like mid normal range seems to be struggling across some portfolios. So that's something we're closely monitoring and like trying not to panic too much, but thinking ahead of, okay, how do we make sure we pad the occupancy, get solid bookings, and not panic if we are still going to see that in month, bookings come in.
I really quite agree with that, as I've been looking at market data across a number of markets, and I think this trend is actually been really starting to appear almost for 2 years now, which is the average booking window may be moving back, but the early booking is actually much stronger. Like there's a lot of very good advanced booking. And then what used to be the peak window is now like almost a trough. It's where like all those gains erode and then it snaps up in the short term where it's very volatile from a pricing perspective. Um, and it's interesting, it's hard to know if what parts of this are like consumer behavior changing, consumer demographics changing. Some of it, I think, is also price. I think our industry is always reactive and trailing in terms of price response to the consumer. Um, and it is curious. And I have noticed that, like, that I think was what I brought up earlier is like in January, February, a lot of these folks I was talking to were very concerned for the spring this year. Normally, you'd expect to see that booking window start in January. It almost felt like it started like mid-February this year. But on top of that, there were a lot of pacing gains. And I think, if we roll back all the way a whole nother year, it kind of reminds me of like when we were all at DARM and Key Data was saying like, hey, occupancy's up, pace is up. And then the year, that eroded over time. So I'm curious, is there anything you guys are like specifically, how are you asking your teams to kind of deal with that? How do you know where to hold, when to hold, and when to cut?
I really stress the importance of segmentation with our team. It is easy to get lost in a large portfolio. All of our revenue managers have at least 1,000 units, and one size absolutely does not fit all. And we saw the same trough, but I was telling the team this morning, like, I think when we get to the end of the year, we're actually going to see a longer average booking window than, on the whole, than last year. I really think we will because we try to really focus on getting that good, desirable inventory booked early. So we were booking in November, December, even dating back to the fall, getting some of our good stuff sold for spring break so that when we would expect to have that normal booking surge, same thing. We were like, oh gosh, what's happening? And, I have to spend a lot of time showing, hey, we've already sold it. It's okay. And so the last minute is truly becoming, last minute. But we have a couple of markets like PCB, for example, Port Aransas, that are truly and have always been last minute markets. They're having the best pace of some others because we kind of got the good stuff booked early. I don't want to sell the 10-bedroom house 30 days in advance. Like almost no good can come of that. So just knowing, how to segment that portfolio and not treat everything the same, understanding the booking window for each unit type and the guest demographic for each unit type has been helpful. It's good for overall revenue, but it does make for some really wonky day-to-day numbers in terms of year-over-year bookings.
I think to kind of piggyback off of what like Heather and Jordan were, no, sorry, not myself, Heather and John were saying. I think people are more familiar with the industry now, right? And so we're seeing more of that U-shaped booking pattern where they're booking earlier or later. And I think that's because it's kind of like a collector's item when you're purchasing an STR, right? They're unique. They all have different attributes. It's not a commodity. And so like in other collector markets, you have people with disposable income or high interest and intent, and they're really going to focus on, booking early and getting the inventory they want, getting that collector's item they want. And then I think as they become more familiar with how vacation rentals kind of market, they tend to negatively yield and the prices go down over time as you approach stay date. And people know that, and they know to wait to book lower prices. And so if you don't care about what specific, home you're staying in, and you reserve that optionality, you're okay booking later at a cheaper price. And I think for revenue managers, how we kind of get over that is it almost goes from pulling the different levers of prices and minimum stay and whatnot, and almost more of a financial engineering problem where you're really trying to project what you think is going to happen, and kind of reserve optionality in the things you can do, right? So you're not just trying to guess the exact right price for the exact right day because there's lots of uncertainty out there. Now you're trying to position your strategy in a way where you have different options as you go through the booking window to hopefully end up in an okay spot.
Interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm curious what collectible that you're into that let you made that connection.
It has to have a slide. The pool has to have a slide, has to have pickleball court. I don't know, right? Like you have your list and you got to find that house. That's,
Yeah.
Somebody's going to book a different way than the last minute for sure.
I am curious for you guys, because personally for me, spring was pretty surprising in its strength. But what have you noticed in May? Some few of you have brought it up, but what trends have you noticed in May? Have you noticed things change, or have your team proactively changed anything as we've gone basically through May here?
I can go on that one. So I feel like from the jump, we were pricing pretty aggressively to get occupancy outside of Memorial Day or event weekends. Like that was, strategy going in. And then again, kind of waiting and seeing like, okay, can we actually increase in some segments that Memorial Day weekend, like noticing the weather and kind of that last minute pattern in some of those coastal markets to see, can we actually spike up price while also being really cognizant of the minimum stays and not over pushing on those and trying to pull those back and make sure that we're getting the inventory out there so guests are seeing, okay, I can stay for 2-3 nights and get a decent home there. So that was something we've been taking the strategy in.
That's cool. Did you have success with was there success anywhere with being able to spike on the weather in this kind of short-term window?
There has, yep. In those drive-to markets, we've noticed that we've been able to do that. And that's always kind of the gamble and that risk. I think, Jordan mentioned it. It's usually you're decreasing price as you're getting in because it's expiring inventory. Like if you don't sell it, you don't make anything. But, do we take kind of a different approach now that we know guests are booking last minute? So we've been kind of trying to test that out and watch, hotels and other competitors. I mean, that's always the big thing is you have to look at the market. You have to look at available inventory and seeing, okay, what can we try there? But we are seeing like in some areas where the guests are willing to come, again, drive to. We're not talking about Hawaii. You're probably not going to spike in the last minute there. But we are seeing that, that's working.
That's really
I
interesting.
even feel like our summer bookings slowed down when we had that weird, like extended cold snap. Well, maybe always cold where you are. I'm on the Gulf Coast. We had like a really unseasonably cool spring, like to the point that it was uncomfortable here. And I thought that would slow down, obviously some people that would drive in for the weekend, but we would have days where I'm like, is it too cold at people's homes that they don't even want to think about their summer vacation? It was a strange little dip there. And I guess it was like late February, mid-March, maybe, whenever it was.
True for ski. When it snows early, people are more likely to book their ski trip as if it doesn't snow. So to your point, like it puts things top of mind for people to make decisions. Yeah, it's interesting.
I agree with that. Maybe Lauren will tell us if she sees it too. But I feel like when I've worked with properties in the Pacific Northwest in particular, where it's often very dark in the winter, as soon as you have an early spring day, you start to see bookings for the summer. Like as soon as it's sunny in the spring, people are like, "Oh, I do want to go somewhere. I'm not depressed for a moment and can think about spending money."
Yeah, so true. Like, especially, I mean, you're up there in the Pacific Northwest, like the Oregon coast, it's easy to get to from a lot of markets. The bulk of the demand is drive to, and the second the weather changes. And then it's funny too, because it's kind of the flip in the summer as well. If it gets too hot, you see the people at the last minute, they want to go out to the coast, get that ocean breeze. So it is definitely kind of weather dependent on those drive to coastal markets.
Yeah, it's interesting to think like because as we're dealing with this short booking window, like really watching the weather and the destination and making decisions. I think that's what you were referring to in the first part, right, Lauren? But there is kind of an unexplored, not unexplored, but maybe just very intuitively explored piece, which is how does weather in potential locations for buyers affect their buying, right? And that's a very I think it's very obvious in the Pacific Northwest where we're kind of at the extreme of like darkness winter and you have a short summer. But I think that's a curious thing where if you have large portfolios to see if you can align those in different places, right?
People
Yeah, and
make fun of me because I want to start every meeting with a quick chat about the weather. I'm just collecting data.
well, and I was going to go back
How's
to
the
what
weather where you
Rachel
are?
said. Segmenting, like that's where you have to segment by the unit type, by the location, because you have to get into the nitty gritty.
I always think of it as like big changes. So a couple decades ago, Burlington Coat Factory did a huge study to try to figure out what causes people to buy coats, right? And I think the answer was it was like it's an average of 12-degree decrease in temperature over a 14-day span, right? So there's like it's a trigger. If it gradually gets colder, no one's thinking about their coat, and then all of a sudden it's cold, right? But if it gets colder 1 week compared to the previous, you're like, oh man, winter's coming. Let me go John Snow this and go to Burlington Coat Factory, right? And so I think it's like you need that cognitive change in the markets for them to start thinking about it. So whenever there's a spike or a drop and a drastic change in weather, same thing for news, right? No one really cares about the small local news, but if there's a big thing, it can prompt things. And so really, I try to look for kind of those big signals.
Interesting, yeah, small local news prompting thing, especially for those driving. That's really bright. It's funny, with AI making it easier to do the analytics, now we all have to become psychologists, right? Cool. Well, let's move on to kind of what's happening right now. Like we're in a pretty critical time period for booking for summer. I'm curious, what are some examples of what you're seeing in your summer markets? Is there anything that's really unique that you've noticed in your data that has caused you to develop an interesting strategy? What is it you've noticed? What data are you looking at? What's something you've implemented? I think this is a great opportunity to just talk about kind of like fun, specific stories of things you're doing or seeing or looking at to help kind of prompt other people to look into their portfolios. So, what are you guys thinking for summer right now?
Maybe we talk about World Cup really quick. I know it's like over top.
Perfect.
Um,
It's in the summer.
so yeah, hotel blocks have been dropping like crazy. So that's a signal, right? Like, can hotels fill the demand that's coming on their own without having any vacation rental inventory, depending on the market? I mean, AirDNA has been a great source for tracking some of this. But I think it's also elevated the idea, and I think Lauren and Rachel mentioned this, like understanding what's happening with hotels does matter, right? It does give you some early signals. So I think the more sophisticated our industry gets, that we're finding more partners are want to pay for that data figure out ways to look at it. And it's certainly more important in some markets more than others.
It's definitely critical in those urban markets, um, for sure. Uh, does anyone else have World Cup markets? Then maybe Heather? No?
No.
I was under the impression that Galveston would be one. I don't think I ever fully bought into that, but boy, their tourism board really did. And it has been a non starter, complete non starter. I feel like it's having the opposite effect, if I'm being honest, in that market for being that close to Houston.
It's so funny. We did a revenue management roundtable about World Cup in December, and one of the things I was posing to the panel, which I don't know that they really understood exactly what I was saying, but I wondered if like the places that are outside, there's a good marketing opportunity to tell locals to get out of the city, right? Because there's a lot of people who don't like being in a busy city when there's a giant event, and it's like, well, just we have a deal for locals, like come out to the coast and just spend a few weekends out here and get out of the city. Um, Obviously, I was thinking of Seattle at the time, where like you literally can't drive anywhere if there's a lot of people here. Houston's pretty big, so I'm sure there's
Yeah.
different highways, but kind of interesting. But Heather, one thing I wanted to ask you about this is like, how do you think the World Cup is going to do? Since you brought it up, are you concerned about that for your markets? And what do you think the biggest driver for maybe this weakness on the hotel side is?
Depending on the market, we have seen it drive a little bit, and I think the games that are still TBD is the July ones, the finals, and which teams make it. So, in markets where we have visibility to World Cup and they are hosting the July final, like it's like semifinal and then quarterfinal, vice versa, that those are the games that maybe we still sit on some higher rates. But outside of that, there's pretty general consensus that this is normal summer pricing now. It's not worth trying to like strategize around any additional demand.
I kind of agree with that. I think, outside of major games, um, we may see something change if ticket prices come down. There was a really good article that came out in one of the magazines. I'll see if I can find it for you guys, this week, that was just showing ticket prices. They're absurdly high. Like for games that like it's like, unless you're a fan, who cares?
Well, it was
And
like the flight was cheaper than the ticket, right? And like just all
well,
that.
and you add in now that, international flights are very
Weird.
expensive right now. So that
Yeah.
international chunk that should really drive these kind of off games is very harmed. And I'm sure we'll maybe get into some international travel for those markets who have it, but a little bit of a concern on the World Cup side. For the rest of the summer, though, I think we got a lot better news. So what are you guys seeing at the beach?
Solid advanced bookings, like some strong pace going into the summer, which is music to my ears. It's like oftentimes we're wondering, okay, are we going to get that last minute? But we went in again being more realistic with price. We weren't shooting, for unicorn bookings, trying to get super high rate. We kept it pretty like close to last year's price to kind of get that early booking curve. And that's paying off and allowing us to get that early occupancy.
This is like the story I've heard all year from the enterprise revenue managers, is just that stabilization and conservative kind of like pricing position. Have you seen any changes in the booking pace uh, as we've gone into May? And are you expecting any changes to booking pace as we get into June?
Yeah, that 30 to 60 day window still seems to be the lull. So June is kind of softened a bit. So now it's, and the other big thing that we've been exploring a lot is OTA cancellation policies and, how that determines the search ranking. So I think that's a big piece for revenue managers to consider and play around with, depending on what's the bulk of the market doing there. Like, what can you trade off versus a cancel, because you go more flexible on the policy, you get moved higher in the ranking. But then if you go more flexible, you run the risk of cancel. So that's something I'm curious if others on this call have been playing around with and exploring, are those OTA policies.
Yeah, especially the ability to use that Airbnb depending on the PMS. most PMSs, you have access to use the Airbnb cancel by date, right? So you can test just dropping to like most flex for like watch list properties or need properties for like next week. And your risk is low. So they book, so they cancel, whatever. It was probably going to sit empty. So I think that will be really interesting once it can be done in bulk for large portfolios.
So right now you have to operationalize that on the extranet listing by listing.
Yeah.
Do they have any rule sets, like time-based rule sets?
Yeah. So that's exactly what it is, right? It's like, I just want these 3 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday next week, and I'm just willing to go super flex for
That's very
these
interesting.
properties. So you can just do very targeted.
Has anyone else tried that? And in the chat, have any of you guys experimented with that? I think that feature was announced in the Airbnb winter update, right? If I recall correctly. So I think it's been around for a little while, but harder to operationalize. Has your team done any of that, Lauren? Or are you like really changing your overall
I mean,
cancellation process?
a little of both, right? Like if you want to just change for a period of time, but I mean, cancel by date as an industry, once we like really have this, then I think it's going to be just a great like tool in everybody's toolbox. We're not there yet, but it's good signs. I think we're getting there, and it'll put pressure on PMSs to build it, other channels to like make it easy to do. Yeah, going by property by property is just like a lot. So you can build an AI agent, I guess, to do it, but is that worth it? I mean, I think that by Q4 of this year is my understanding it will be in the API, and that or like by then maybe some of the PMSs will have released it in the API. So we'll see.
It's essentially building a dynamic cancellation policy, which is something I've hoped for a long time. Like, which bookings are the most valuable to protect? And like you said, which ones are we willing to just roll the dice and see? And I mean, them also, Airbnb also having the, non-refundable policy to me is part of that. Like, that's been helpful. We've seen some really good movement on that, and we're working on building that internally so that we can offer that. And that's a gamble on the guest part. But even without that, we've actually had a significantly lower cancellation rate this year through all channels than last. And I think that some of that comes from what Lauren is saying is, we can't try to get the unicorn numbers anymore. Like, the sooner we realize that as an industry, I think the better off we'll all be.
I definitely agree. Like when you're at enterprise scale, I mean the host and the SMB probably like they're incentivized to go for the unicorn because they only have so much to sell. But that stabilization is really important at a large scale. And it just seems like every enterprise revenue manager I'm talking to is doing that. And when it comes down to those cancellation policies, it's very interesting because I think a lot of people are worried about cancellation and it should be tracked, but you got to kind of think about like if you're priced right, you mitigate that risk quite a bit. Um, but also like I really advise people not to create policies to deal with like the small segment of people who are just going to shop like that. There's always going to be a segment of the consumer base that is willing to change their plans 3 days before because they found a better deal. If you set up rules to try to deal with them, you run the risk of like really alienating your core booker. Like, and there are different profiles, right? Like I know I would never do that. I don't like the unsureness of not knowing where I'm going to stay. When I book something, I book it, right? But I'm curious, like, I'm not sure what I'm curious about right now.
I just
But
was gonna on the Airbnb, there were two things. I don't know if you want to go back to that.
no, please.
One was somebody said they got their Airbnb rep to take a spreadsheet from them and maybe help them. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. I don't know if someone, this recording, someone from Airbnb can listen to it, I guess. But that was a good little note. And then Henry asked about other Airbnb announcements. I think other thing with Airbnb is like they're just rolling out hotel inventory, and what else is next. But I think that's something curious to watch. Like, are people going to go to Airbnb and now it's an environment where we're competing with hotels, like maybe more directly. We'll see just how that evolves.
Yeah. I think for a long time they have been at least had a large segment moving towards just being more traditional OTA. I would expect with the moves toward like the movement to commissioning is that, and I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see them do more Expedia-like things in terms of rate parity. Our industry has really not had to deal with rate parity um, in any substantial sense. I think we should expect that from Airbnb because they can force hotels to do it. They'll build the infrastructure. They'll force us to do it. Now, that's something you should be prepared for, right? Um, and it's unfortunate. Now, the upside of that is because brands are so much smaller, it's very unlikely, I think, that they will be able to deal with these things on a direct website. So you will still have the ability to not maintain parity on a direct website. And I think that if you are a company making investments, especially in this age of AI, your website is probably one of the best places to invest in technology. And there's a lot of things you can do to also hide or to, well, not only hide, but optimize for your consumer purchasing. But that allows you to get around this rate parity thing. But that's a prediction. Let's pass it off. I do want to come back to summer on your portfolio, Rachel. I'm curious, are you seeing the same thing that Lauren is seeing in terms of like, how was your early booking? And then what are you seeing kind of like right now? And what are you doing? What are your teams doing about it?
We came into summer, well, we're not in summer yet. We came into spring with a really strong summer pace. And then I feel like we kind of hit a bit of a wall. One of the things we thought about was with Easter having been so much later last year. And for us, that essentially just means spring break. But we tend to see when the guests check out or get on the other side of spring break, okay, now we're really ready to make our summer plans. Well, that happened in such, a different space from each other this year with our Easter shifting that we had some really weird data coming in day to day. I think we're still feeling a little bit slow. We were really concerned with July for a little while in a lot of markets. I'm now seeing July pick up like crazy, although I am about ready to give up on July 4th as a rate driver. Like it may as well be another summer week. It's killing me. I don't care where you put it in the week. I don't think it matters to most guests anymore. Not in our markets anyway. I think, your big Americana towns that are going to do, celebrations, sure. I don't know. In Orange Beach, Alabama, I think it's more or less another week. So I think it's maybe a mistake to try to get some kind of huge premium on it. At least in my experience, it's been hard to sell. It's picking up now, but we're within 45 days now.
Rachel, I'm really curious because Gulf Shores isn't that typically like Saturday to Saturday? So I'm curious to you and to others on the call, like with July 4th falling on a Saturday, did you all change your length of stay strategies?
I've been fighting the Saturday to Saturday for the better part of my career. I hate it. It is dead as far as I'm concerned. Now there is a time and a place for it. Like we do on advanced bookings, try to get that. The owner likes the completely full calendar, no holes. That does. I feel like it doesn't sell anymore here. In the very rare instance of your super high end luxury, the guests come the same week. Sure, we have a couple of markets. In Deep Creek, Maryland, and on coastal North Carolina that the owners, we cannot convince them. I have good data this year, though. I think maybe this is the year. But that July 4th week has been terrible for those, even worse for those markets that the turn is on a Saturday. And the historical data even kind of messes us up because the only week that's going to be the July 4th week is checking in on the 4th, in most cases at 4 p.m. And there's no event, in most of the places too. It's maybe an extra day of PTO you don't have to take. But I have again been fighting that Saturday to Saturday. I find it archaic. It was based on old airline schedules in drive to markets. So yeah, that one will get me fired up. Like, please don't do that.
I think the Saturday to Saturday, I agree completely. I think across Gulf markets, you've seen the fastest erosion of these old restrictions. And I think that's because it's so competitive down there. And you guys are really leading. And honestly, in the market data, you led the spring. As we go further north up the eastern seaboard, where you see more and more of these restrictions, they're like a year or 2 years or 3 years behind in terms of revenue management practice. They haven't given those up. They're not near as strong. this spring, right? Early booking is still looking good for summer, but they don't have the same kind of reaction. I think there's a few mixes here. One is, what is the purpose of like the Saturday to Saturday? Um, I understand it in areas where it really is operational. You go up to the Northeast and like their cleaners have to drive like an hour and a half away, so they try to align it all, right? That makes sense. But if you don't have an operational restriction, getting out of it seems like a really good idea, especially because young demographic buyers are not purchasing 7 nights. Millennial buyers are not doing that the way that, they haven't been trained to do it because that's not just how things have been done. So they don't have the habit of doing it. And when they go to the OTAs, that's not what they're looking for first. They may book a 7 night, but they don't go looking for the 7 night and they don't know necessarily to check in and check out Saturday. So by having those restrictions, you really limit your visibility. And I think it's much more visible as you go up the Eastern Seaboard into those markets where some of those restrictions are still in place. Around your question, Lauren, about 4th of July, really good observation. If nobody else has observed this and you have 7 to 7s, you should. But the fact that the 4th of July is on a Saturday, brutal this year. Shannon, one of the revenue managers on the Wheelhouse team, working with clients, she has worked with a bunch of them to strip those off just around those weeks. And for those segments of the portfolio where they've been able to do that, substantially better performance, right? Substantially better. And I'm curious, like, did you guys take some actions around that, or how have you been handling the 4th of July too, Lauren?
Yep. We like immediately removed 7 night mins and Saturday to Saturday in those markets that are still legacy where they're still running it, or it's like they'll allow us to remove it 30 days before, 60 days before. That was one that we're like, can we please go ahead and move this early? And I think in most markets, we, looked at a really like shorter min stay just for those weekends, like 3 nights, because again, it's like guests being on a Saturday and most people still working. It's like, I didn't want to bank on trying to get that longer length of stay. So trying to go for something shorter, that was our move earlier in the year.
Makes sense. Heather, what have you seen around the 4th of July this year?
Yeah, I agree with all of those comments, and that it may make it so those weeks in that period isn't necessarily different. Some markets have like festivals or events that change that. So it's still going to be a hot period, more so than another weekend in July or late June. But I think, yeah, 7 to 7 in all cases is tough and not great. Like, and honestly, in some markets, right, you could get the high price for 3 nights that you would on the whole week. Like, so if you're worried about it, like trying to convince and sell the strategy by talking about, hey, I'm going to get 1,500 a night, so I'm still going to get your weekly rate of 4,500 or whatever that math is. They might be a little shocked, but there really could be that opportunity, because the other thing about the other generation you were saying, I think, John, is people don't have the vacation time. Like they just don't have the 7 days to take or the 5 days to take. I think that's just another factor in why we don't see the long stays too.
I think the length of stay is the first to go. And I think it's kind of an easy lever to pull, because having lived through several, major economic events at this point, I do think for the most part, people are still going to take their vacation, especially to a drop to. Like, people are still going to take the trip. And I think it just may result in one less night, right? Those 3-day weekends might be extremely profitable. July 4th being on a Saturday for somebody who doesn't force a 7-night stay is actually great, because you have a day, maybe they get a flex holiday, right? I know us in hospital, we're never off on the busiest day of the year, right? But having that person may, if they would have historically only been able to take one day off, they may get a 4-day weekend now, and we can sell that at a premium. But trying to sell the whole week with a Saturday check-in is, I don't want to see that anymore in the future, but it is very hard to get away from some homeowners. We had a great A/B test between 2 different islands in North Carolina this year. One really has clung to that, the other has not. And the shorter stay Pleasure Island is just blowing their pacing out of the water. We saw like triple digit pace increases early in the year, whereas I'm struggling to move the inventory at the expected rate on topsoil where you've got to stay the week.
Can you publish that publicly for the industry to help out all the other revenue managers in these areas?
I'm gonna
So they
make
can
a
share with the
really
owners, be like,
nice,
you're making less money.
flashy. Yeah, I'm gonna have to like that. We've got to get, and our teams there do a really great job of communication. But I mean, it's just something about that area. I think the homes have been in the families for years. That's what they've come to expect. And, if they don't care about the open week, fine. Like we as revenue managers have to care about that open week. But I do plan to, however it all shakes out, like I think it would be a great case study at the end of the year to put together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. We talked a little bit about like flexible cancellation policy, a lot about like minimum length of stays. And I think like lots of revenue managers, owners, like really want to pull those levers because they have a bias for action and they want to feel like they're doing something and they want to feel like they're using all their tools in their tool belt. But most of the times, like I personally prefer just to restrict the funnel like as close to booking as possible, right? I want to keep the funnel wide open as possible for as long as possible and control it and restrict it as minimally as possible to have the widest net cast. And the few times I do use it, it really is usually like based on segmentation for really specific situations. So I did an event recently, expressed an event recently, and the vendors and the attendees have totally different desires, booking patterns, needs, etc. And so we really weren't trying to optimize that kind of generally control minimum length of stay or cancellation policy. What we were really trying to do is make our pricing extremely unattractive to the attendees and extremely attractive to the vendors, right? And so it might look a little weird if you're just going through it day by day, but then when you're pulling up and looking for that, right, you really see the vendors see a great deal and the participants never want to stay there. So it's more about that.
Yeah. I was just what you're saying is in most cases, it's better to manage length of stay by price than a hard setting. Just like that's generally true, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think, I think it's really important to really think about like everyone should go do some consumer research. Go to your CVB and look at how the consumer demographics are changing. I've talked to a number of folks who this has come up more and more like in the last year for me, talking to folks who have had really strong return guests for a very long time, and they start to express concerns like, I think our demographic might be aging out. And are we positioned to sell to the new demographic? And people sometimes forget millennials are your family group now. We millennials have different buying trends than other people. Gen Z professionals who are in the higher income brackets. This is really big if you're in the Northeast, New York professionals, like they're buying differently. And you need to go do some research because if you do fear that your return guests are aging out, that those parents, are starting to not come or maybe going on to fixed incomes, you need to think about what the actual buying behavior of these other people are so that you can meet them where they are. And I think length of stay is a huge one. I mentioned that before. But the other thing to keep in mind too is like if you have the lower length of stay, you can still, this is like a strategy that like it seemed really big like 8 to 10 years ago when people were still doing a lot of on the phone booking. We had a lot of reservation teams. And I think that a lot of these marketing things are coming back in this environment of being more competitive, right? Which is sell stuff to people after they booked. You get the booking in the door and then you sell them more nights, right? People, once they've made the commitment to stay at your place, will often book additional nights or will upgrade. That's another thing that it's harder when you have vacation homes because you're potentially taking revenue from one owner to another. And maybe you guys can figure out some clever ways to do sharing there or to like get bookings on things that aren't placed for the owner yet. But I do know it in some of our urban environments, one of the most successful strategies they have where they don't have the same owner considerations is they really organize the booking around certain room types and drive a lot of booking through those. And then they just offer those people upgrades. And a lot of those people will accept them. They're like, oh, yeah, I'll totally take the 2 bedroom or the 3 bedroom or the penthouse. And that's how they're like filling those. And then they keep the transient price really high on those so that when they do book, it's also like a top level booking. So there's a lot of interesting kind of like aftermarket strategies, but the key is you have to have the booking in place already to do those. And if you are really restricting your funnel, like Jordan said, you just really limit the opportunity to start thinking about that. Okay, we've got only a few minutes left. I do want to ask you a little bit about the future. do you have concerns about what's kind of going on right now with gas prices and the Iran war? What is your team doing to prepare for that? What do you know? Like, what is the kind of trigger point for you to do anything you've prepared for? I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are, because to me, it seems like the macro environment's pretty stressful, but booking is still not really responded to that yet. On the other end of the coin, we do see that inflation is starting to come up. A lot of companies have reported that they're going to start building these prices to into their products in May. And so I'm just kind of curious how your teams have thought about this, what you're preparing for, and kind of what the triggers are, if anyone would like to.
I mean, this is something we've definitely been talking about for months, ever since everything started happening, was looking more proactive, like all the way into the fall. And again, kind of the theme that we've been talking about is not shooting crazy high with price, keeping things flexible, making sure that we're appealing to guests. And something that, we're talking about guest demographics and booking patterns changing. And, I think peak seasons will always have peak performance. But I do think, like, as people are evolving and millennials are becoming more of like the bookers, we may see even increased shoulder season demand. I think a lot of us try to avoid the school holiday breaks. Like, I, for one, prefer traveling in October, November, when kids are in school, so I can go, so that's something I'm watching and thinking about, is just, are we going to see actually stronger demand outside of those kind of typical really busy, heavy travel weeks because of expensive flights, expensive gas, crazy lines at TSA? That's kind of what I've been thinking about and we've been talking about as a team.
Makes a ton of sense.
I think millennials moving into the main guest demographic is actually a phenomenal thing for our industry, because we are masters of dissociation. Like, I'm going to take my vacation, right? Like, I'm not going to die sitting at my desk. I'm going to take it. And we've also never had any money. We were born into financial crisis. So we're going to find a way. And whether that, comes with a shorter stay, a different location, like, oh, by the way, I didn't know Alabama even had beaches. Like, we're going to take the trip, I think, for the most part. And, catering to that as much as possible, again, probably through shorter lengths of stay, through flashy promotions that we can get sucked into because of how we have to shop. Various things like that, I think, is what's going to be what kind of sets this year apart. Us at an enterprise level being able to participate in OTA promotions, we've never really been able to do that before, has been really helpful. I'm hopeful. I think we're going to see some effect, because the overall cost of travel, as I get ready for a 12-hour road trip next week, I'm horrified at what that's going to be like for gas. But I mean, I'm still going. I'll deal with it when the bill comes, next month. But I think overall, as long, barring any major natural disasters that I won't name, I think we're going to end up with a good summer.
I think you really have to tie all this ambiguity to a really specific story for the specific goal you're trying to accomplish. I think we kind of, like, even though I didn't have any World Cup markets, I feel like the World Cup kind of affected late spring going into summer with me, because it affected how people were approaching the season, right? World Cup was supposed to be a really big deal. There was a huge letdown. We saw the variables play out in different ways. I think that was a huge wake-up call, not maybe necessarily to professional revenue managers, but to the half of supply that isn't professional, right? And so they're approaching this in a much more conservative way, or thinking about it more deeply. And so when you see, changes in economic status affecting tax brackets differently, gas affecting things differently, geopolitical situations affecting different areas differently, I think what you have to do is, instead of painting with a broad stroke, is really figure out, is that my demographic? How does it affect my demographic? How's that tied to my market or property? And so you really just have to create that story to follow through. And it'll be different for everybody, and it just takes a little bit of thought. But I think sometimes people get a little too analytical and forget about the human element. And so just think about yourself as a buyer, and usually that'll solve a lot of problems.
Good advice. Heather?
I'll just, what is the future? I'll say two things. One is the merging worlds of hotel and vacation rental. And it's something to watch. It's something to be aware of. And as kind of everyone said, know your market and know how important that is that you're paying attention. The second thing is distribution is only getting more complex. And there's two things I learned in the last month I'll share. One is Vrbo is testing pay to play. So just like Expedia travel ads in the hotel world, it's do you want to, bid on and pay for conversion? So we'll see how quickly that rolls out, what they do with it. There's some interesting things about, how that would work. You don't want one of your homes to compete with another one of your homes. And then the other one is Marriott Homes and Villas does have promotional levers, but it's not in very many PMSs. And I think if we well, it's just a channel to watch. It's not a huge contributor, but it's there. So will more PMSs build to it? Maybe if there's more pressure put on them. But all of these things, and like customizing your content, right? To know your audience, make it speak to your target persona. But it's only getting more complex. So I'll stop there. But those two things.
Yeah. Hey, I think the main thing is like it just comes down to your pace. Like be really your like it's important to know what's like that the higher order stuff, what's happening macro, what's happening in your market. They're meant to give you context, but at the end of the day, it comes down to like what you're doing and what your goals are. And if you're doing well, you don't need to make big changes. The caveat to that is like have the plan B and have the plan C and know what it is that's going to trigger you doing something. Like what kind of slowdown you would need to see to make a change. What kind of trends in your data, like what you're going to look for. And I think like honestly, we're a little late in it, probably starting in April, like you should be making sure you're looking at that all the time. And because a lot of these revenue managers who we're talking to have been conservative. They've really been taking advantage of that early booking, and so they're feeling pretty comfortable. And so they'll tell you that the market's doing pretty good. But if you're looking at your portfolio and you haven't been taking advantage of that, you might have a very different feel. You need to think about what you're going to be doing. And ideally, you already have in place what you're going to be doing. The other kind of thing on this is I do think the consumer is going to get kind of squeezed, but it's going to be certain segments, right? It's hard to truss out how drive-in like gas prices affect stuff. Like when we've looked at wheelhouse data, um, sometimes it actually increases drive-in markets because if gas prices are high, flight prices are high too. So it's hard to totally pull that apart. I do think though, the one segment that you really want to focus on right now for summer is that kind of commodified segment. If you have properties that are on the lower end of quality, that are maybe unupdated or small, and then you have a lot of them, that's probably going to be the demographic that's going to be the most squeezed if we see prices. And I say if, but it seems very likely that we see regular living prices are going to go up. Those people are going to be the ones that are going to have the hardest time um, paying any kind of premium. And because that product is commodified, it becomes a race to the bottom as it always does in the short term. So thinking about ways to move that product now, um, I think it will just be beneficial if you're thinking really conservative, because I don't think our higher end demographic is, going to not take their vacation. They may take a shorter vacation. They may look at other areas, which is important to understand. That's a big one that I had mentioned is pay attention to the markets around you more so than ever, because consumers are absolutely looking at multiple places more so than I think we've been used to. But other than that, comes down to your pace, right? Like if you're doing well, don't just change because you read the news. Awesome, guys. Well, really appreciate all your time today. Thank you to the panelists. You guys had some great insights. I really loved chatting with you all. We will get this recording up sometime today or tomorrow and send it out to everyone. And otherwise, we'll see you in the midsummer and kind of talk about how things ended up.
Thanks, John.
Bye,
Thanks.
guys.
Bye.
Thank you.